Malik's absence had cast a dark shadow over the village. Without him, the council became more fractured, and the villagers turned against each other, their whispers growing louder with each passing day. Amani, torn between her duty as a seer and her love for Malik, knew the village needed him now more than ever. But would he return? And if he did, would he forgive her? In the depths of her turmoil, Amani received a vision, an intense, vivid image of the village burning. It was a nightmare made real, a future shaped by her decisions. The fire spread quickly, consuming everything in its path, and in the center of the flames stood Malik, his face twisted in anguish. Amani saw herself standing by, unable to save him. The vision ended abruptly, leaving her breathless and shaken to the core. This was her future, unless she acted swiftly. Determined to prevent the vision from becoming a reality, Amani sought out Malik. She knew it was time to make things right. She found him at the edge of the village, standing beneath the tree where they had first met. His face softened as she approached, but there was still a wall between them. "Malik," Amani began, her voice trembling, "I've made mistakes, but we can't let the prophecy win. We have to come together for the village, for everyone." Malik looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Amani, I don't know if I can ever trust you again, but I know that we can't let this village fall apart." The two of them stood in silence, knowing that their next decision would change everything. With Malik's tentative agreement, Amani and he began to work together once more. Though the trust between them remained fragile, the village was still on edge, and the council, once again divided, refused to work with Malik or Amani. It was clear that they needed more than just leadership. They needed a united front. But how could they unite a fractured community when betrayal and doubt were hanging over them like a storm cloud? Amani realized that the solution lay within her. As a seer, she had the ability to guide the villagers with her visions, but she knew that it was time to stop relying on the prophecy and start creating their own destiny. She began to speak to the people, telling them of the sacrifices they all needed to make for the sake of peace. "We must choose unity over division," she said. "We cannot let our fears and doubts destroy us." The villagers listened, some with skepticism, but others with hope. The winds of change had started to stir, and it seemed that Amani's words were beginning to have an effect. But just as the village began to settle, a shadow from the past reappeared. The traveler, once a distant figure, now stood at the heart of the village, his presence like a dark omen. He had returned, and with him, the storm Amani feared most. The moment Amani had dreaded had arrived. The traveler, who had once seemed a mere harbinger of doom, was now at the heart of the village's discontent. He stood in the center of the square, surrounded by the angry faces of the villagers who had begun to doubt Malik and Amani's leadership. They whispered about betrayal, about power struggles, and about a future that seemed uncertain. The traveler raised his arms, calling for silence, and the crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on him. "This is the moment of truth," the traveler said, his voice ringing out with authority. "The prophecy has already been set in motion. Amani cannot escape her fate. She will betray you, Malik, and nothing will change that." Amani's heart raced, the weight of his words pressing down on her. But Malik, standing beside her, looked at the crowd and then back at the traveler. "No," Malik said firmly, his voice unwavering. "We will choose our own fate, not the prophecy, not the traveler, but us." With those words, the village held its breath. The prophecy, the traveler's influence, and all the doubts seemed to hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. But Amani and Malik had chosen their path. It was a path of unity, a path of healing, and a path that would determine whether they could break free from the chains of destiny. The final confrontation had begun, and the future of the village was in their hands. The traveler's words echoed in Amani's mind like a constant hum. No matter how hard she tried to focus on the unity she had sought to bring to the village, his presence loomed like a shadow. The villagers, once hopeful, now stood divided. Some believed the prophecy would come to pass no matter what they did, while others followed Amani's plea for unity. As tension grew, the sky above seemed to darken, mirroring the brewing storm in their hearts. Amani knew the time for words had passed. It was no longer enough to simply speak of hope. They needed action. She called a meeting with Malik, the council, and the most influential figures in the village. Her heart raced as she spoke. "We cannot allow fear to take root in our hearts," she said, her voice firm. "The prophecy is not the end. It is only the beginning. We have the power to choose our destiny." Malik, standing beside her, nodded in agreement. His gaze was calm, but his eyes spoke of a deep uncertainty. The villagers were restless, and the travelers' presence only heightened their doubts. But the seeds of unity Amani had planted began to take root. One by one, the villagers stood to voice their support, each committing to work together despite their fears. The meeting ended in a quiet optimism, though the storm in the distance was far from over. Amani and Malik knew they had just begun to fight for their future, and it would require more than just words to secure it. As the days passed, the tension between Amani and the traveler grew. He appeared frequently in the village square, speaking in riddles, sowing seeds of doubt among the villagers. His words had the power to unravel the fragile trust they had begun to rebuild. Yet despite his influence, Amani refused to be intimidated. She had seen the darkness of the prophecy, but she had also seen the light that could emerge from it. On a particularly stormy night, Amani visited the temple to seek guidance. The winds howled outside, rattling the stone walls, and the candles flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. She knelt before the altar, praying for strength and clarity. "I cannot change the prophecy," she whispered, "but I can change how it is fulfilled." Her words echoed in the silence. In that moment, a sudden calm settled over her. The Spirit spoke to her in whispers, revealing a path she had not yet seen. The prophecy did not have to be a path of destruction. It could lead to rebirth. Amani rose from the altar, a sense of peace washing over her. She had a plan. It was time to confront the traveler, to challenge him and prove that the future was not his to dictate. Amani's heart pounded as she walked toward the village square, where the traveler stood, surrounded by a crowd of villagers. They were listening to his every word, their faces clouded with uncertainty. Amani stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Enough," she said, her tone resolute. "The time for fear is over. We will not be ruled by prophecy, and we will not be controlled by you." The traveler turned slowly, his eyes narrowing with amusement. "You think you can stop what is inevitable?" he asked. "The prophecy is written in the stars, Amani. It cannot be undone." Amani squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "The prophecy is not my master," she declared. "I am not bound by fate. I choose my future, and I choose to fight for it." Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. The villagers watched in silence, their eyes flicking between Amani and the traveler. For a moment, the traveler said nothing. Then, with a slow smile, he spoke. "Very well, Amani. We shall see if you truly have the power to rewrite destiny." His words were laced with challenge, but there was a hint of respect in his voice. The tension was palpable as the village waited for what would come next. As the days passed, Amani could feel the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The village was still divided, but her actions had sparked something within them. The people began to see that they had a part to play in shaping their destiny. But the traveler's influence was not easily shaken. His presence in the village was like a poison, slowly creeping into the hearts of those who had once trusted Amani and Malik. Amani and Malik spent every moment they could together, working tirelessly to unite the villagers. They held councils, they spoke with the elders, and they sought to heal the rifts that the traveler had caused. But despite their efforts, the traveler's influence seemed to grow stronger, and doubts lingered like a dark cloud. One evening, as Amani sat by the fire, her mind racing with worry, Malik approached her. His expression was one of deep concern. "Amani," he said softly, "we've done everything we can, but I feel like we're losing them. The traveler's hold on the village is too strong. Perhaps it's time to face the truth. The prophecy may be inevitable." Amani looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had always believed that the future was hers to shape, but now she wasn't so sure. "I will never give up," she replied, her voice firm. "I will fight for this village, for us." Malik didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told Amani that he was not as sure as she was. As the fire crackled, Amani realized that the real battle was not just against the traveler. It was against the doubt that had taken root in the hearts of those she loved most. The final confrontation loomed. Amani had made her choice. She would face the traveler and challenge the prophecy, no matter the cost. The village had begun to divide once more, the tension between Amani and the traveler reaching its peak. The villagers could feel the storm in the air. Something was about to give. Amani stood before the traveler, who waited for her with a sly smile. "You've come to admit defeat, I presume?" he asked, his tone dripping with arrogance. But Amani did not flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with resolve. "No," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "I've come to show you that the prophecy is not fate. It is a choice, and I choose my people." The traveler's smile faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. "You think you can change the course of destiny?" he asked incredulously. "The prophecy has been set in motion for generations. It cannot be undone." Amani stood tall, her heart steady with purpose. "The prophecy only holds power if we let it. I choose to fight for our future, to forge a new path." She turned to the villagers, who stood silently waiting for the final verdict. "We all have a part to play in this. We will not let one prophecy decide our fate. Together, we will decide our destiny." The traveler's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Amani had spoken, and now it was time to act. The village, the prophecy, and the traveler's dark influence were all at a crossroads. The future of the village lay in Amani's hands. The air was thick with anticipation as Amani faced the traveler. The villagers gathered around them, their gazes shifting nervously from Amani to the mysterious figure who had sown fear and doubt among them for so long. Amani could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on her. This moment would either solidify her leadership or condemn her to failure. She glanced briefly at Malik, who stood behind her, his expression unreadable. "I've heard your words," the traveler said, his voice soft but carrying an underlying threat. "But you are fighting against the inevitable, Amani. Do you think you can outmaneuver fate? The prophecy is ancient. It has already begun to unfold." Amani took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't believe in inevitability. I believe in the strength of our will, the choices we make, and I choose not to submit to the prophecy." Her voice rang out, clear and firm. "I choose to believe in my people, in their ability to fight for what is right." The traveler's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Very well, Amani. Let's see what choices you make when the consequences of your defiance come to pass." Amani stood tall, knowing this was the moment of truth. She wasn't just fighting for her own future anymore. She was fighting for the future of every villager who had placed their trust in her. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, it was clear that a battle was coming, one that would determine the fate of them all. The village awoke the next morning to the distant rumble of thunder. Amani stood on the balcony of her home, looking out over the landscape. The storm in the sky mirrored the storm that had taken root in her heart. The traveler's words still echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The village was tense, but there was a new sense of resolve in the air. People moved with purpose, their steps quick and sure as they prepared for the days ahead. Amani's decision had ignited something in them, a renewed sense of hope that they might yet survive this challenge. Later that day, a messenger arrived with troubling news. The traveler had rallied a group of followers, people who had become disillusioned with Amani's leadership and believed that the prophecy must be fulfilled. They were planning to march on the village and confront Amani once and for all. The time for wars had ended. Now, they were about to face an enemy with an army of his own. Amani gathered the council, including Malik, and laid out a plan of action. The villagers had always been a peaceful people, but they had fought for their survival before. Now, they would have to do it again. "We will stand together," Amani said, her voice strong. "We will protect our village and our future, no matter what it takes." That night, the village was on edge. The sounds of distant drums echoed through the night air, signaling the travelers' approach. Amani stood by the gates of the village, watching the dark horizon with a mix of determination and fear. She had prepared her people as best as she could, but now all they could do was wait. The first wave of travelers arrived just before dawn. Armed with weapons and shouting chants of prophecy, they rushed toward the village gates. Amani stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve unshaken. She had chosen this path, and now she would defend it with everything she had. Malik stood beside her, his eyes scanning the enemy forces. "We're outnumbered," he said quietly, but there was no fear in his voice, only a quiet resolve. "But we will fight. We must," Amani nodded. "We will hold the line." She raised her voice so that all the villagers could hear. "We fight for our future. We fight for our choice." The villagers, though afraid, rallied behind her. They may not have been trained warriors, but they had a strength born of love for their home and their people. The clash of weapons soon rang out, and Amani's heart swelled with pride as she watched her people defend their homes, each swing of the blade a defiance of the travelers' dark influence. The battle raged for hours, the sky darkening as the storm finally broke. Lightning crackled overhead, striking the earth with a violent force. In the midst of the chaos, Amani found herself face to face with the traveler. His eyes gleamed with an eerie calm, as if he knew something she didn't. "You fought well, Amani," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But it won't matter in the end. The prophecy is inevitable. You cannot escape your fate." Amani stood firm, the weight of her choice clear in her eyes. "I don't believe in fate. I believe in what we choose to make of our lives." She gripped her sword tightly, ready to face whatever came next. The traveler laughed, a dark sound that sent a chill down her spine. "You truly think you can change the course of destiny? You are just one person, Amani. The village cannot stop what is coming." "I am not just one person," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am the people, and we will decide our own fate." Without another word, the traveler lunged toward her, but Amani was faster. She met his strike with a swift parry, and the two clashed in a battle of wills and strength. The storm outside seemed to intensify as their swords clashed, the future of the village hanging in the balance. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The traveler lay defeated, his influence over the villagers broken. The sky cleared, and the first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the village. Amani stood, her breath heavy but steady, her sword still in her hand. The villagers gathered around her, their faces filled with awe and relief. Amani looked around at the people she had fought so hard to protect. They were battered, some wounded, but they were still standing. They had chosen their future. They had chosen unity over fear, strength over submission. "We've done it," Malik said, his voice filled with pride. "We've won. Amani nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. No, she replied softly. We've only just begun. The village, once divided, was now united in a shared vision of the future. The prophecy, once thought to be inevitable, had been rewritten by their choices. Amani had not only saved her people, but she had also fulfilled her own destiny, one that was not dictated by fate, but forged by her own hands. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Amani knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, but she had learned one thing for certain. The future was theirs to shape together.